So, me caveman, let's go. Number 10. The Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. Start with a habit you already know. The pull of a drink at the end of a long day. We treat that pull as a modern vice, a product of bars and breweries and bad decisions. One biologist argues it is nothing of the kind. He argues it is roughly 10 million years old, and that it was written into our ancestors long before anyone brewed anything. The idea belongs to Robert Dudley, a physiological ecologist at the University of California, Berkeley. He laid it out in a paper in the year 2000, then expanded it in a 2014 book called The Drunken Monkey. His claim is simple and unsettling. Our attraction to alcohol is an inherited appetite, a leftover from primates who depended on ripe and overripe fruit. Here's the chain. When wild yeasts feed on the sugars in ripe fruit, they produce ethanol. In the wild, that ethanol sits at low levels, often around 0.5% to 1% by volume. Ethanol is also a light, fast-moving molecule. Its scent drifts on the air through dense forest. For a hungry primate, that scent was a signal, a beacon pointing straight at scarce, calorie-rich fruit. An appetite for that scent would have paid off. The smell meant sugar. The alcohol itself sharpened hunger, the same way an aperitif works before a meal. Over deep time, the animals that chased the scent ate better and left more descendants. There is a genetic anchor for this story. A researcher named Matthew Kerrigan traced a single change in an enzyme called ADH4. About 10 million years ago, in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, that enzyme became roughly 40 times better at breaking down ethanol. The timing lines up with ancestral apes spending more time on the ground, where fallen fruit ferments further. The living evidence arrived in 2022. A team led by Christina Campbell measured the fruit eaten by wild spider monkeys in Panama. The fruit carried 1 to 2% alcohol, and the monkey's urine carried alcohol byproducts. Wild primates, it turns out, drink every day without meaning to. Now translate that into the modern world. In the forest, the dose was a trace. Today, we distill spirits to 40%, far beyond anything evolution prepared us for. An ancient reward system meets an unnatural supply, and the reward becomes a trap. That is the mismatch, the same trap we fall into with sugar and fat. Not everyone is convinced. Catherine Milton, also at Berkeley, argued that most wild fruit holds almost no ethanol, and that primates avoid rotten fruit rather than seeking it. There is also the pen-tailed tree shrew of Malaysia, which drinks fermented nectar at human-level doses, yet never appears drunk. Critics point to it. So do supporters. So we hold 3 readings side by side. That ethanol was a real adaptive signal, that it was a meaningless byproduct of a fruit diet, or the deeper cultural idea that this old craving later pushed us to invent fermentation on purpose. Behavior does not fossilize, so the argument leans on genes and living monkeys. What lingers is the question it forces. Why would evolution reward us for swallowing a mild poison? Number 9. The Grandmother Hypothesis. Move from appetite to the shape of a whole life. Human women routinely live for decades after they can no longer have children. Menopause arrives somewhere around 45 to 55, and then life continues, often for 30 years or more. In nature, that is bizarre. Almost every other animal reproduces until it dies. The explanation that many researchers favor is uncomfortable in its logic. It says those extra decades exist because old women were useful. The idea was first sketched by the biologist George Williams in 1957. It was turned into a full model by the anthropologist Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah. Hawkes did her fieldwork with the Hadza, hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. Starting in the 1980s, she watched who gathered what. The most productive foragers of deep, hard-to-dig tubers were not young mothers. They were older women, well past childbearing. And when she tracked the children, a pattern jumped out. A weaned child's weight gain followed the grandmother's effort, not the mothers, once a new baby arrived. The mechanism follows from that. A grandmother digs the tough roots a small child cannot handle alone. She feeds the just-weaned grandchild. That frees the mother to have another baby sooner, without the older child suffering. The daughter's total number of surviving children climbs, and the genes that kept the grandmother strong and alive get passed along. The result, over time, is selection for a longer life and a slower aging body, while the end of fertility stays fixed where it is. Hawkes and her colleagues formalized this in a paper in 1998. In 2012, Hawkes and Peter Kim ran the numbers in a simulation. Grandmothering alone, they found, could pull an ape-like lifespan up to a human one in under 60,000 years. There are rivals. Hillard Kaplan argued that we live long to support a lifetime of skilled hunting and learning, not to babysit. Another view, the Patriarch Hypothesis, says male fertility into old age drove longevity, and that women's long post-reproductive life is just a side effect. Nature offers a strange echo, too. Killer whales and pilot whales also have menopause, and pods with a living grandmother matriarch raise more calves. Studies of killer whales by Darren Croft and Sam Ellis found that mothers who stop reproducing spend their long later lives guiding the pod to salmon in lean years, and that grandmother orcas measurably lift the survival of their grandcalves. It is the closest thing in the animal world to the human pattern, and it hints that a long life after fertility pays off through care, not chance. Critics push back that grandmother effects may be too weak, or that in a harsh past, few women lived long enough to matter. And the framing itself makes people uneasy. It measures a woman's evolutionary worth by provisioning, and it implies that natural selection kept women alive on purpose, past fertility, because they were still doing work. Hawkes has kept defending the model, returning to it as recently as 2025. If our long lives came from old women digging roots, then the next question is what shaped how our bodies move. Number 8, the persistence hunting hypothesis. Picture a lean human jogging across an open plain in the worst heat of the day, chasing an animal that keeps outrunning him in short bursts, then has to stop. Hours later, the animal collapses, unable to cool itself. The human walks up and finishes it. This is persistence hunting, and one theory says our whole body was built for it. The landmark paper came from Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman in the journal Nature in 2004. Their argument is that the genus Homo, starting about 2 million years ago, evolved not just to walk, but to run long distances. The purpose was hunting by exhaustion. A four-legged animal cannot pant and gallop at the same time, so it cannot shed heat while sprinting. A human can sweat and run at once. That cooling edge is the key. We carry between 2 and 4 million sweat glands, and our skin is nearly bare. We are, in effect, a walking radiator. The list of running adaptations is long. A ligament at the back of the skull steadies the head. The huge muscle in the buttocks stabilizes the trunk. A long Achilles tendon and a springy arched foot store and return energy. Short toes push off cleanly. Even the balance organ in the inner ear is enlarged for running. Homo erectus, from about 1.9 million years ago, shows the full package. Long legs, a narrow waist, and shoulders decoupled from the head so the arms can swing to counter the stride. This matters because real weapons came much later. Stone spear points are far younger, and the bow is only around 60,000 years old or so. Before that, running down prey was a way to eat meat. The living proof comes from the Kalahari. The tracker, Louis Liebenberg, documented sand hunters running kudu to death across the midday desert. These hunts cover 20 to 40 kilometers and last 2 to 5 hours. The animal is startled into galloping again and again, never allowed to rest and cool until its core temperature turns lethal. Not everyone accepts it. Henry Bunn studied the ages of animals at ancient butchery sites and argued early humans ambushed prime prey, not ran them down. Others say persistence hunting is rare among living peoples and may be a recent trick, not proof of an ancient adaptation. Lieberman answered that critique in 2007. And some argue the running body evolved for scavenging, racing other predators to a carcass, rather than for hunting at all. So the readings compete. A pursuit predator that kills by exhaustion, an ambush hunter whose running is incidental, or a scavenger built to reach dead meat first. Whichever is right, the image is hard to shake. We may have been the animal that does not overpower its prey, but simply refuses to stop, and outsuffers it under the sun. Running 1 calories. The next theory asks where in the body those calories went. Number 7. The expensive tissue hypothesis. The human brain is a fuel hog. It is about 2% of your body weight, yet it burns roughly 20 to 25% of your energy at rest. That is a staggering bill. And here is the puzzle. Our overall metabolism is normal for a primate our size. So how did we grow a brain 3 times larger than expected without paying more overall? Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler answered that question in 1995. Their idea is called the expensive tissue hypothesis, and it is a story about a trade. To pay for the brain, they said, another costly organ had to shrink. That organ was the gut. The human gut is small for a primate, only about 60% of the expected mass. Our colon is short, our small intestine large. That is the gut of an animal eating rich, easily digested food. The energy saved by not running a huge digestive system was moved, in effect, to the brain. It was a reshuffle, not a windfall. But a smaller gut demands a better diet. You cannot shrink your digestion and then eat tough leaves. The shift lines up with the arrival of meat, marrow, and fat in the diet. Around 2 million years ago, at the time, brain size begins its steep climb. Jaw, teeth, and gut all shrank together, which fits the picture. The theory has taken hits. In 2011, a team led by Ana Navarrete looked across many mammals and found no consistent trade-off between brain size and gut size. That weakened the strict version of the idea. Other researchers proposed different ways to fund the brain, such as storing more fat, moving more efficiently, or having relatives share food. In one version, our ancestors banked energy as body fat to buffer the brain's constant demand. In another, walking upright so efficiently freed up the needed fuel. In a third, relatives feeding one another simply spread the cost across the whole group. So again, we hold several views. The clean trade of gut for brain. The messier picture where many sources paid the bill. And the version we meet next, where a single technology made the rich diet possible. What unsettles people about this theory is its bluntness. It suggests the mind is downstream of digestion, that the thing we are proudest of was bought by cutting a deal in the belly. You are, in a sense, what your ancestors managed to kill and cook. And that word cook points straight at the next theory. Number 6. The cooking hypothesis. If the brain needed a richer diet, what delivered it? The primatologist Richard Wrangham of Harvard has a one-word answer that still starts arguments. Fire. In his 2009 book, Catching Fire, he argues that cooking, more than the spear or the hand axe, is what made us human. Cooking does something no tool can. It pre-digests food outside the body. Cooked starch and cooked protein give up far more usable energy than raw. Cooking also softens food, which cuts the labor of eating. Great apes chew for 5 to 6 hours a day. We chew for less than 1. That is why our teeth and jaw muscles shrank. Wrangham dates this turning point early, to Homo erectus, about 1.8 to 1.9 million years ago. He reads the small gut, the small teeth, and the big brain of erectus as proof that it was already cooking. And here's where the theory runs into trouble. The oldest solid evidence of controlled fire is much younger than that. A site in South Africa called Wonderwork Cave reaches back about 1 million years. A site in Israel, Gesher Beno Yaakov, is around 790,000 years old. Regular hearths only become common around 400,000 years ago. That is a gap of 1 million years between when Wrangham says we cooked and when we can prove it. His answer is that early fire would almost never survive in the ground, so absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Critics who want to see a hearth are not satisfied. That unresolved gap is the theory's soft spot. Cooking did more than feed the brain. It killed germs and broke down plant poisons, which widened the menu. Wrangham also argues it built the household itself, a central hearth where food was processed, shared, and guarded. He goes further, and more controversially, suggesting cooking locked in a division of labor by sex. Many researchers push back hard on that, saying it reads modern habits into the deep past. There are rival mechanisms. One says raw meat and marrow alone, no fire needed, were rich enough to grow the brain. Another, from a 2016 study by Catherine Zink and Daniel Lieberman, says simply slicing and pounding food mechanically did much of the softening before fire was tamed. What makes the cooking theory unsettling is the dependence it implies. Modern raw food dieters, even with endless food, tend to run short on energy, and women often stop menstruating. We may be a species that can no longer digest its way to survival on wild raw food, a creature remade by its own campfire. Fire moved us through time. The next theory is about how we moved across the world. Number 5. The Kelp Highway. This one was not just disturbing. It was, for decades, close to forbidden. To argue it out loud could damage a career. It is the theory of how the first people reached the Americas. The old orthodoxy had a name, Clovis First. It held that big game hunters called the Clovis people, around 13,000 years ago, were the first Americans. They were said to have walked in from Asia over a land bridge, then south through a corridor between two great ice sheets. For most of the 20th century, to question this was to invite ridicule. John Erlandson at the University of Oregon and his colleagues offered a different route. They called it the Kelp Highway. The idea is that the first Americans came by boat, hugging the Pacific coast, following a ribbon of kelp forests that ran from Japan around the northern rim of the ocean down to Baja California and beyond. Those kelp forests were a moving feast of fish, shellfish, seals, and seabirds, the same resources all the way along. The overland story had a fatal flaw. That inland ice-free corridor was probably a dead zone, empty of food and plants, until around 13,000 to 12,600 years ago. That is too late, because a site in southern Chile blows the timeline apart. The site is Monte Verde, excavated by Tom Dillahay. It dates to about 14,500 years ago, more than 1,000 years before Clovis, and it sits far to the south, which means people arrived even earlier to get there. Monte Verde preserved 9 species of seaweed in its hearths, and has chewed cud, tying the earliest Americans straight to the coast. In 1997, a panel of senior archaeologists visited the site and accepted it. That visit is often called the day Clovis first died. More sites piled on. Paisley Caves in Oregon, with human waste dated to about 14,300 years. Cooper's Ferry in Idaho, around 16,000 years, worked by Lauren Davis. Then, in 2021, fossil footprints at White Sands, New Mexico, were dated to between 23,000 and 21,000 years ago. That pushed human presence back further than almost anyone expected. There is one great obstacle. When the ice melted, the sea rose by about 120 meters and drowned the ancient coastline. The very villages that would prove a coastal migration are now underwater. So the theory is strong on ecology and inference, but thin on dated coastal homes from the migration itself. Genetics supports it. showing a founding group splitting from Siberians and spreading fast. The deeper lesson is about science itself. A true idea was held down for decades because the establishment had decided the question was closed. Some of what we bury is merely inconvenient. Some of it is genuinely horrifying. Number 4. Habitual cannibalism. This theory does not stay in the past. It argues that eating other humans was not rare or aberrant, but a recurring part of our history, and that the proof is written into the DNA of people alive right now. The keystone is a gene called PRNP, and a variant of it named G127V. It was reported by Simon Mead and John Colling in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2009. Their evidence came from a disease called Kuru. Kuru struck the 4 people of Papua New Guinea. It is a prion disease, always fatal, that attacks the brain. It spread through funerary cannibalism, the practice of eating dead relatives, including the brain, as a mark of respect. In the mid-20th century, it reached epidemic levels among the 4. Then evolution did something visible in real time. The protective variant G127V rose to about 7% frequency in the worst hit region in only about 10 generations, and not one person carrying it died of Kuru. That is natural selection driven by cannibalism, documented in living memory. Here is the leap that disturbs people. Another protective feature, a mix at a spot called codon 129, is common in populations all over the world. Mead and Collins argued that this global pattern is a scar, a sign that prion epidemics, plausibly from cannibalism, swept through humanity deep in prehistory. In other words, the marks of ancient people eating each other may sit in nearly all of us. The bones back up the behavior, if not the exact scale. At Gough's Cave in England, about 14,700 years old, researchers Chris Stringer and Sylvia Bello found human bones with cut marks and skulls turned into cups. At Grandolina in Spain, about 800,000 years old, the remains of children were butchered exactly like game. The oldest known human cannibalism. Neanderthals did it too, at Mulagorsi and El Cidrón, where human bones carry the same tool marks as the deer bones beside them. What the cannibalism was for is debated. In 2017, James Cole calculated that a human body yields only about 125,000 to 144,000 calories, a poor return next to a large animal. He used that to argue much cannibalism was social or ritual, not just food. The debate runs 3 ways. Some read it as plain nutrition, food when game was scarce. Some read it as ritual, a way of honoring or absorbing the dead. And some read it as crisis, the desperate act of the starving. The same cut marks can fit all 3, which is why the bones alone rarely settle the argument. Mainstream researchers stay cautious. The global genetic signature is real, but tying it specifically to cannibalism rather than some other prion pressure is inference, not proof. Still, the theory drags a taboo into the light. It suggests that eating our own may have been an ordinary chapter of the human story. And if our ancestors unsettle us, so do our cousins, and the vicious fights over what they were. Number 3. The Hobbit of Flores. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, a team led by Mike Morwood and Peter Brown pulled a tiny skeleton from a cave called Liang Bua. The specimen, labeled LB1, stood about 1 meter tall, with a brain of only around 380 to 420 cubic centimeters, the size of a chimpanzee's. They named a new human species, Homo floresiensis, and the world called it the Hobbit. Almost at once, a rival theory formed, and it was brutal in its simplicity. LB1, it said, was not a new species at all. It was just a modern human. One of us, deformed by disease. The leading voices were Matgeir Henneberg in Australia and Toiku Jacob, the senior paleoanthropologist of Indonesia. Over the years, they and others offered a shifting list of diagnoses. Microcephaly, a small-headed condition, then Laron syndrome, then cretinism from iodine deficiency, then a rare form of dwarfism. Finally, in 2014, Henneberg argued for Down syndrome, pointing to facial asymmetry, a small brain case, and short thigh bones. The dispute turned ugly. In 2004 and 2005, while Jacob held the fossils, some of the bones were damaged, and a pelvis was broken. It became one of the most bitter feuds in the field, tangled up with fossil access, national pride, and personal rivalry. Against the disease idea, the evidence kept stacking up. Dean Falk studied casts of the brain's interior and found a shape unlike any microcephalic. Karen Bobb, Debbie Argue, and William Jungers showed that on the traits which separate diseased humans from true fossils, LB1 lined up with Homo erectus, not with sick modern people. The wrist bones, studied by Matthew Tocheri in 2007, were primitive and ape-like, a shape no modern human disease can produce. Then the ground shifted again. In 2016, at a site called Mata Menga, researchers found even smaller hominins on Flores, about 700,000 years old. One sick individual cannot explain a whole lineage of little people living on the island for hundreds of thousands of years. The mainstream explanation is island dwarfism. Isolated on Flores, with limited food and no large predators, the hominins simply shrank over generations, exactly as the island's elephants shrank into dwarf forms. The stakes here are enormous. If the hobbit is real, then another human species survived until perhaps 60,000 years ago, sharing the planet with us. The pattern only grew stronger in 2019, when yet another small island species, Homo luzonensis, turned up in the Philippines. And a world with several kinds of humans in it raises the darkest question of all. What happened when we met one? Number 2. The Neanderthal genocide hypothesis. The Neanderthals vanished about 40,000 years ago. That disappearance came soon after modern humans pushed into Europe, roughly 45,000 to 43,000 years ago. The two events are so close together that one dark explanation keeps returning. That we killed them. That the first thing our species did on meeting another intelligent human was wipe it out. The timing feeds the suspicion. Radiocarbon work led by Tom Hyam, published in 2014, found that in any given region, the two peoples overlapped only briefly, somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years. That is fast. The replacement did not drag on. The gentler version of the story is competition, not slaughter. Paul Mellers argued that modern humans simply had better gear, sharper stone blades, projectile weapons, wider trade networks, and richer symbolic culture. In 2016, a model by William Gilpin and colleagues showed that even a small edge, combined with some interbreeding, could erase the Neanderthals without a single battle. And the genocide idea has a serious problem. There are no mass graves of Neanderthals killed by modern humans. There is almost no direct sign of organized war between them. Worse for the theory, we did not only fight them, we bred with them. Svante Pabo's team sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, and it showed that everyone outside Africa carries about 1.5 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. The two peoples had children together. Neanderthals were also no easy victims. They were strong, skilled, long-lived, and they cared for their injured. So other causes crowd in. Climate swung violently in this period. A huge volcanic eruption, the Campanian Ignimbrite, went off around 39,000 years ago. Neanderthal populations were small and scattered, which makes any group fragile. Some researchers suggest disease, that modern humans carried infections the Neanderthals had never faced. Others, like Oren Kolodny in 2017, argue their end may have been mostly random, a matter of migration and chance drift, with no superiority and no violence required. There is also a third human population lurking in this story, the Denisovans, known mostly from stray DNA and a handful of bones, who interbred with us as well. The more we learn, the more crowded and tangled that ancient world becomes, and the less it looks like a simple tale of us against them. The honest verdict is that it was probably many causes at once: competition, climate, disease, interbreeding, and small numbers, all grinding together. The pure genocide story endures in the imagination because it is dramatic, but the evidence for it is thin. What makes it so hard to accept is what it would mean about us. And that leads to the last theory, the one that turns the violence inward. If we may have destroyed them, the final question is what we did to ourselves. Number 1. Human self-domestication. Here is the most disturbing idea of all, and the one that reaches deepest into who we are. It says that humans are a domesticated species, like dogs bred down from wolves, except that we did it to ourselves. And the tool we used to do it was killing. The main modern voice is Richard Wrangham again, in his 2019 book, The Goodness Paradox. He builds on a Russian fox experiment and on studies of bonobos. The starting point is a strange pattern. Domesticated animals share a set of traits: less aggression, smaller teeth and jaws, shorter faces, less difference between the sexes, and more childlike features. Look at humans over the last 200,000 years, and you see the same drift. Our heavy brow ridges shrank. Our faces softened. A study by Robert Schieri in 2014 linked those gentler skulls to rising social tolerance. Then comes the paradox in the title. We are, day to day, an astonishingly peaceful animal, slow to sudden violence. Yet we are also capable of cold, planned, extreme cruelty. Self-domestication explains the first half. Something bred the hot, reactive aggression out of us. The mechanism is the part that stops people cold. Wrangham calls it the execution hypothesis. Once our ancestors had real language, small groups of ordinary men could quietly plan together. They could conspire to kill the local bully, the domineering, violent alpha male, by ambush, as a group, at low risk to themselves. Do that generation after generation, for thousands of years, and you are systematically removing the genes for reactive aggression from the population. It is capital punishment acting as evolution. We bred ourselves tame by killing our most violent members. This rests on real fieldwork. Christopher Boehm studied living hunter-gatherers and found exactly this leveling instinct, groups ganging up to cut down anyone who tries to dominate them. Language is what makes it possible, because only speech lets weaker men safely coordinate against a stronger one. Wrangham ties the intensified process to the rise of our own species, about 300,000 years ago, when our skulls began to soften. Bonobos, he notes, seem to have tamed themselves in the wild too, becoming gentler than chimpanzees with no human hand involved. And the Russian foxes, bred only for tameness starting in 1959, sprouted floppy ears and curly tails within decades, proving how fast domestication can move. There are critics. Some question whether the domestication syndrome is even a real, tight cluster of traits. Others note that coordinated ancient killing leaves almost no clear trace in the ground, so the execution idea is nearly impossible to test. But the reason this theory sits at number 1 is what it implies. It suggests that our gentleness, our cooperation, maybe even our sense of morality, was purchased across countless generations of organized killing. That the tame, kind animal you are was shaped by the execution of everyone too violent to fit in. Our best trait may rest on our darkest habit. Step back and look at the 10 together, and a single shape appears. Each theory takes an ordinary human trait and drags it into deep, uncomfortable time. The pull of a drink, the length of a life, the way we run, the way we think, the food we eat, the path we walked into a new world, what we ate when times were hard, who we shared the planet with, and what we did to them and to ourselves. Every one of these reveals the same thing. A familiar human feature turns out to be the residue of a harsh bargain. We flatter ourselves with origin stories about toolmakers and thinkers. These theories offer the unflattering version: a poison-seeking primate, an animal that kills by exhaustion, a brain paid for by a shrunken gut, a species that tamed itself by killing. Notice how they interlock. Running one meat and fire built the brain. The brain enabled language. Language enabled the quiet conspiracies that bred us tame. The story is not 10 separate ideas. It is one long chain of trade-offs, each purchase paid for by something lost. Notice, too, where the evidence runs thin. The darkest ideas, cannibalism, genocide, self-execution, leave the faintest marks in the ground, which is exactly why they stay contested. And that points to something about the word disturbing. A theory often earns that label, not because the data is weak, but because the conclusion offends how we like to see ourselves. So, how does an idea actually get buried? The historian Thomas Kuhn described how normal science clings to its ruling paradigm and resists anything that does not fit, until the anomalies pile up too high to ignore. These 10 theories are case studies in that resistance. The Kelp Highway is the clearest example. For decades, Clovis first was doctrine, and pre-Clovis claims were career poison. Tom Dillahay endured years of hostile scrutiny before Monteverde was accepted. The Hobbit feud shows another route, where access to the fossils was controlled, the bones were damaged, and dissent was published for years, regardless of the mounting counter-evidence. The tools of burial are ordinary: a paper rejected in peer review, a grant quietly denied, a reputation put at risk, a specimen locked away, and claims about cannibalism or genocide draw an extra layer of suspicion because they are lurid, and because lurid claims attract weak evidence. There is a fair side to this. Extraordinary claims really do need extraordinary evidence, and behavior does not fossilize. So caution is not always cowardice. The title of this list is partly a provocation. Most of these theories were in fact published. They simply had to fight uphill, and some are winning, now that once looked doomed. The useful habits for anyone watching are simple. Ask who benefits from the orthodoxy. Ask what would prove the idea wrong. And remember, the discomfort is not disproof. For all the confidence on display, the honest position is that much of this is unresolved. We still do not know when controlled fire and real cooking began, and that million-year gap haunts the cooking theory. We do not know how common cannibalism truly was, or whether the worldwide genetic signature really traces back to it. We do not know if humans and Neanderthals ever fought in an organized way, or whether competition and chance did all the work. We cannot yet test whether self-domestication ran on execution, or on some other kind of selection. We do not know how many human species overlapped with us, or how late each survived. We cannot reach the drowned coastal villages that would settle the peopling of the Americas. The list goes on. How strong were grandmother effects when so many people died young? Was persistence hunting a real driver or a rare, recent trick? Does the brain and gut trade really hold when a broad 2011 study failed to find it across mammals? Is the domestication syndrome a real thing or a loose label? And what actually drove that ancient alcohol mutation? The obstacle behind all of these is the same. Behavior, diet, and social life rarely turn to stone, but the tools are catching up fast. Ancient DNA pulled straight from cave dirt, chemical isotopes in bone, and sharper dating are closing gaps that looked permanent. These unknowns are not dead ends. They are open invitations, and several may be answered within a single generation. It would be easy to treat all this as morbid trivia. It is not. Each dark theory has grown into practical, present-day science. The study of Kuru and the prion gene built the foundation for understanding Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and mad cow disease. Work that began with cannibalism now protects living brains. The ancient DNA revolution, which earned Svante Pääbo a Nobel Prize in 2022, keeps rewriting the story of interbreeding and extinction year by year. The drunken monkey idea feeds evolutionary medicine, framing our cravings for alcohol, sugar, and fat as mismatches we can learn to manage. Grandmother research informs how we think about healthy aging and menopause. Endurance running science reshaped how athletes train and how we understand the human foot. The cooking theory sits at the center of debates about processed food and metabolism. Self-domestication feeds serious discussion about the roots of morality, the biology of aggression, and even criminal justice. The coastal migration work drives a whole field of underwater archaeology and has redrawn the timeline of how the Americas were filled. Studying our darkest past, it turns out, is one of the best ways to understand the present body and mind you carry around. This is not someone else's history. It is the biography of your own species. Return, at the end, to the thread that runs through all 10. These were not theories too weak to believe. They were theories too uncomfortable to embrace easily. From a drunken monkey reaching for fermented fruit, to a species that tamed itself by execution, the list climbed steadily into darker and more revealing territory. The mirror these ideas hold up is not flattering, but an unflattering mirror can still be an accurate one. That is the quiet lesson underneath everything here. Comfort and truth have nothing to do with each other. Some of these dark ideas will turn out to be right. Some will turn out to be wrong. The only honest way to sort them is by evidence, not by how they make us feel. There is a real cost when science buries what it does not want to hear. Good ideas are delayed for decades, and the people who carry them pay for it. There is also real value in hard skepticism, in forcing extraordinary claims to earn their place. Both forces were at work in every theory on this list. What lingers is the paradox at the center of the last one, and of the whole story. The gentlest, most cooperative animal on Earth may owe its gentleness to the harshest habits in its history. We are the creature that ran prey to death, traded its gut for a mind, may have eaten its own, and bred itself tame by killing the violent. The full picture of where we came from is stranger and darker than the story we usually tell, and it is still being written.